My beloved child. Stop scrolling for just a moment. Do not rush past these words, because something is waiting for you inside this message that your heart may have been quietly asking about for longer than you realize. You may have come here casually. You may have opened this message while thinking about someone. You may have been searching for a sign, an answer, a confirmation, or simply something that would make sense of the strange emotions you have been carrying. But what you are about to hear was meant to find you in this exact moment. Pause here. Take a breath. And listen carefully. Because there is something about the person connected to your heart that you have not fully understood. You have seen one version of them. You have heard one version of their story. You have watched the way they behave, the way they disappear, the way they return, the way they hide behind silence, pride, distance, or even confidence. But there is another layer beneath everything they have shown you. And that hidden layer is the reason your connection has felt so confusing. You have wondered why someone could look so certain one day and so distant the next. You have wondered why their eyes could say something completely different from their words. You have wondered why, even after trying to convince yourself that you were finally over them, one memory could suddenly bring every emotion back. You have wondered why your heart keeps returning to a person your mind keeps trying to understand. And perhaps the strangest part is this. You may have believed that you were trying to discover who your soulmate really is. But what if the truth is that they have been trying just as hard to hide who they really are? Not because they are necessarily cruel. Not because everything they told you was a lie. But because there is something about their real identity, their real emotional world, their real history, that they have not known how to reveal. And tonight, in this fictional spiritual message, imagine heaven pulling back the curtain just enough for you to see what has been hidden. Not everything. Not yet. Only enough to make you realize why the story never felt ordinary. My child, there was a reason this person entered your life differently from everyone else. Think about it. There are people you meet and forget. There are people who leave a pleasant memory. There are people who become chapters. And then there are people who somehow become questions. You do not simply remember them. You analyze them. You replay conversations. You remember tiny details they probably never realized you noticed. A particular look. A strange pause. A sentence they said months ago. A moment when they almost confessed something and then changed the subject. A time when they seemed jealous but pretended not to care. A time when they suddenly became cold immediately after getting close. A time when they seemed as though they desperately wanted to tell you something, yet stopped themselves. You may have wondered, why does this person behave like this? And perhaps you blamed yourself. Perhaps you thought you were asking for too much. Perhaps you thought you had imagined the connection. Perhaps you convinced yourself that you were simply becoming emotionally attached to someone who did not feel the same way. But there is another possibility. What if you were sensing a conflict inside them that they themselves were struggling to understand? What if their distance was not always rejection? What if their silence was sometimes fear? What if their confidence was sometimes a disguise? What if the person you thought was emotionally unavailable was actually terrified of becoming emotionally exposed? And what if the person you thought had moved on never actually managed to move on at all? This is where the story becomes deeper. Because your soulmate, in this fictional narrative, is not who they pretend to be. They have built an image. A carefully controlled image. They want people to believe they are composed. Independent. Unbothered. Certain. They want everyone around them to believe that nothing reaches them deeply. They laugh when they are supposed to laugh. They change the subject when conversations become emotional. They act busy when they are actually overwhelmed. They disappear when they feel too much. And when someone asks them about you, they may even pretend that your name means nothing. But there is something they cannot control. Their reaction when they are alone. Because when the noise disappears, when the conversations end, when the phone is placed face down, when nobody is watching, the mask becomes much harder to maintain. And in those quiet moments, the memories return. Your voice. Your face. Your presence. The things you said. The things you never said. The moment they realized you were different. And perhaps most painfully of all, the moment they realized they had become attached to someone they were not prepared to lose. My child, this is why I want you to listen closely. Do not confuse someone's performance with their entire truth. People can perform confidence while carrying insecurity. They can perform indifference while carrying longing. They can perform strength while privately falling apart. They can say, I do not care, because saying, I care too much, would expose the part of themselves they have spent years protecting. And your soulmate has been protecting something. Something deeper than ordinary emotion. Something connected to their past. Something connected to the way they learned to survive. Something connected to a secret they have not yet been ready to place in your hands. You may be wondering what kind of secret could possibly explain all of this. And this is where I want you to slow down. Because the secret is not simply another person. It is not merely another relationship. It is not simply a hidden conversation. The deeper revelation is about who they have been pretending to be. They have allowed people to believe that they are one kind of person. But underneath that identity is another side that almost nobody knows. The side that feels deeply. The side that remembers everything. The side that has been afraid of being seen. And the side that, despite everything, has never stopped wondering whether you could be the one person capable of seeing through the disguise. That is why your presence unsettled them. You did not simply admire the version of them they showed the world. You noticed what was underneath. Maybe you never even consciously understood that you were doing it. But something in the way you looked at them made them uncomfortable. Because you saw the hesitation. You noticed the contradictions. You could sense when their smile was not real. You could tell when their "I'm fine" did not mean fine. You noticed when they suddenly became quiet. And perhaps they wondered how you knew. That question stayed with them. How does this person see me so clearly? They could handle being misunderstood by strangers. They could handle people believing their carefully constructed image. But being understood by you was different. Because being understood means being vulnerable. And vulnerability was the one thing they were trying hardest to avoid. My child, there is a reason some connections feel as though they are carrying an invisible history. Sometimes two people do not need years together to create a powerful emotional imprint. Sometimes a few moments can carry more weight than years of ordinary interaction. A conversation can become unforgettable. A glance can become a memory. A goodbye can feel strangely unfinished. And a person can leave your physical world while remaining present in your emotional world. You may have tried to erase them. You may have deleted messages. You may have stopped checking. You may have told yourself that it was time to move forward. And yet something inside you kept asking one question. What was really going on? That question matters. Because perhaps you were not simply mourning the person. Perhaps you were mourning the truth you never received. You were mourning the conversation that never happened. The confession that never came. The explanation that never arrived. The version of the relationship that might have existed if both people had been honest at the same time. And now imagine, for the sake of this fictional spiritual story, that your soulmate has reached a point where the mask is becoming too heavy. They cannot maintain it forever. Something happened recently. Something small on the outside. But enormous inside them. Maybe someone mentioned your name. Maybe they saw something that reminded them of you. Maybe they passed a place where you once stood. Maybe they heard a song. Maybe they found an old photograph. Maybe they opened an old conversation. Or perhaps they unexpectedly met someone who knows you. And that encounter changed everything. Because the person they met did not speak about you the way your soulmate expected. They said something that forced your soulmate to reconsider everything. One sentence. One detail. One unexpected piece of information. And suddenly the story they had been telling themselves began to collapse. Because they realized they had misunderstood something about you. Something important. Something they had judged incorrectly. Something that made them look back at the past through completely different eyes. And here is where the mystery becomes even stronger. The person who revealed this information may not have intended to reveal anything at all. It may have slipped out naturally. A casual conversation. An innocent question. A simple comment. But your soulmate heard it. And they froze. Because the information connected several moments that had never made sense before. Suddenly, your silence meant something different. Your distance meant something different. Your reaction during that old conversation meant something different. And the moment they once interpreted as rejection suddenly looked like sacrifice. The moment they thought you were ignoring them suddenly looked like protection. The moment they believed you did not care suddenly appeared completely different. My child, sometimes the most painful misunderstandings are built from incomplete information. Two people can love each other and still misunderstand each other. Two people can care deeply and still remain silent. Two people can be waiting for the other to make the first move while both secretly believing the other has already moved on. And that is how a connection can become trapped inside silence. Not because love disappeared. But because fear became louder than truth. Your soulmate has been carrying that fear. And there is something else. They have been afraid that if they reveal their true self to you, you will not recognize the person beneath the mask. They wonder whether you would still want them if you knew everything. Not the polished version. Not the confident version. Not the version they show friends. Not the version they present to the world. Everything. Their insecurities. Their regrets. Their mistakes. Their fears. Their emotional wounds. The decisions they wish they could undo. The moments they acted selfishly. The moments they ran when they should have stayed. The words they said when they were angry. The words they never said because they were afraid. And perhaps the greatest fear of all. What if you discover who they really are and decide they are not worthy of your heart? That fear has influenced more of their behavior than you realize. Every time they pulled away, there may have been a battle inside. Every time they wanted to contact you but didn't, there may have been an argument between their heart and their pride. Every time they saw your name and did nothing, they may have stared at the screen longer than you will ever know. And every time they told themselves, "It's better this way," some part of them may have whispered, "But is it?" That whisper has not disappeared. It has grown. And now something is changing. Because eventually, pretending becomes exhausting. A person can pretend for months. Sometimes years. But they cannot pretend forever in the presence of a memory that refuses to die. They cannot keep telling themselves they feel nothing when everything reminds them of what they lost. They cannot keep calling you a mistake if their heart continues to remember you as the one person who made them feel understood. And they cannot keep hiding from the truth when the truth keeps appearing in unexpected places. My child, perhaps that is why you are hearing this message now. Not because you should stop your life and wait for someone. Not because you should chase them. Not because you should assume every coincidence is a supernatural promise. But because this story is reminding you of something important. You deserve truth. You deserve clarity. You deserve a connection where you do not have to spend every night decoding someone's silence. You deserve someone who can stand in front of you without a mask. And if this person truly belongs in your story, then eventually the mask must come off. Not because you force it. Because they choose honesty. That distinction matters. You should never have to beg someone to reveal themselves. You should never have to become smaller so another person feels safe. You should never have to prove that you are worthy of being loved. The person who is meant to walk beside you must eventually meet you in truth. And your soulmate is approaching that moment. But before they reach it, they must confront something they have been avoiding. Their own identity. The person they became in order to survive. The person they became because someone hurt them. The person they became because they learned that vulnerability could be punished. The person who decided, long ago, I will never let anyone have this much power over me again. And then they met you. And suddenly the old rules stopped working. You became the exception they did not know how to handle. You made them care. You made them question themselves. You made them remember feelings they had buried. You made them wonder whether love could actually be safe. And that terrified them. Because when someone has spent years protecting their heart, the person who makes them want to open it can feel more dangerous than the person who wants to break it. They are not afraid because you are dangerous. They are afraid because you matter. There is a difference. And they have slowly begun to understand that difference. Something inside them has shifted. They no longer want to simply know whether you still care. They want to know whether they still have a chance to tell you the truth. And that question is becoming urgent. Because they suspect you may have reached a point where you no longer believe in the connection. They may think you have moved forward. They may think you have forgotten. They may believe your heart belongs somewhere else. And that possibility is creating an emotion they cannot hide from themselves anymore. Regret. Not ordinary regret. The kind that arrives when someone realizes they were given something precious and did not recognize its value until they were standing far away from it. They remember moments they could have chosen differently. They remember opportunities they allowed to pass. They remember your patience. Your kindness. Your presence. And perhaps most painfully, they remember the moment you stopped trying. Because that moment taught them something. You were willing to meet them halfway. But you could not walk the entire distance alone. And when you stopped chasing, the silence became louder. They expected relief. Instead, they felt absence. They expected freedom. Instead, they felt emptiness. They expected you to disappear from their thoughts. Instead, you became harder to forget. And now they are asking themselves a question they never expected to ask. What if I was the one who ruined this? That question has been following them. But there is something you still do not know. The person who knows you, the person who may have unexpectedly crossed paths with your soulmate, may have told them something about you that they never knew. Something that changed the emotional balance completely. Maybe they discovered that you had been struggling too. Maybe they learned that you did not leave because you stopped caring. Maybe they heard that you had been protecting your own heart. Maybe they discovered that you had never spoken badly about them despite everything. Maybe they learned that when people asked about them, you still chose kindness instead of bitterness. And that realization struck deeper than anger ever could. Because anger would have allowed them to blame you. But kindness removed the excuse. Suddenly they had to face themselves. They had to confront the possibility that you were not the villain in their story. Maybe you were simply another person trying to survive the confusion. And once they realized that, something inside them broke open. Not in destruction. In recognition. They began remembering you differently. They remembered the way you listened. The way you noticed small things. The way you did not demand perfection. The way you could sit in silence without forcing an explanation. The way your presence felt strangely peaceful even when life around you was chaotic. And then they realized something that frightened them. They had been searching for that feeling everywhere else. They may have spoken to other people. They may have tried distractions. They may have convinced themselves that someone else could replace the connection. But replacement is easy when you are replacing a habit. It is much harder when you are trying to replace a feeling of being truly seen. And you saw them. Perhaps more clearly than they wanted. Perhaps more deeply than they were ready for. And now the mask is cracking. Slowly. Quietly. But undeniably. There will be a moment when they cannot pretend anymore. A moment when a conversation forces them to choose. Continue hiding? Or tell the truth? And the reason this moment matters is because the truth they are carrying is bigger than a simple confession. There is another layer. A part of their life that you have never been shown. A side of their personality that almost nobody has witnessed. A hidden role they have played in their own life. A responsibility. A decision. A sacrifice. Something they did that they believed would protect everyone involved. And yet that decision may have unintentionally pushed you away. This is why I do not want you to judge the entire story from its most painful chapter. You have only seen pieces. You have seen the result. You have not seen every reason. You have not heard every conversation that happened when you were absent. You have not witnessed every internal battle. And you certainly have not heard everything they have told themselves in the middle of the night. There were moments when they wanted to reach out. There were moments when they wrote words and erased them. There were moments when they nearly admitted the truth. And then fear returned. Pride returned. The old identity returned. The mask went back on. But something changed recently. The mask no longer fits the same way. Because now they know you may have seen through it. And they are beginning to realize that hiding from you does not make the feelings disappear. It only makes the distance harder to explain. My child, if you have been wondering why this connection feels unfinished, perhaps it is because the conversation that would